Hello YouTubers, today I'm going to change the rear brakes and rotors on my 2012 Porsche 997.2. Jack up the car and remove the wheel nuts with a 19mm long socket. If you're going to remove the rotors, it's a good idea to squirt WD-40 on the retaining screws. There are two bolts holding the caliper to the car. Use a T55 to remove these bolts and make sure the caliper doesn't fall. It'll be held on quite tight by the pads, but it's a good idea just to make sure. The caliper can be difficult to remove, so put a screwdriver down the top and pry it off against the rotor. Don't let the caliper hang by the brake lines. I use a bungee cord and tie it round the suspension struts. Tying the caliper up like this also gives you easy access to the brake pads. Use a brake pad spreader tool to push the cylinders back into the caliper. Don't forget to loosen the brake fluid reservoir cap to prevent pressure building up. Use a screwdriver to remove the brake pads, but remember that the pad wear sensors are still attached. If you're going to reuse them, you have to remove them gently. But if you're going to replace them, then you can use a screwdriver to try and pry them out or just pull the brake pad away from them. Remove the wear sensor from the caliper and trace the wire along behind the rotor. There is a clip that holds the sensor in place. It lifts up but sometimes can be difficult, so use a screwdriver to try and pry it open, or you can use your fingers, but be careful, it's sharp. take this opportunity to clean the caliper with a good quality brake cleaning fluid. I use lots of the stuff. Even if they seem clean, there's always dirt hiding somewhere. Look at my floor. Using an impact wrench or a screwdriver, remove the two screws that hold the rotor to the wheel hub. When you remove the rotors, you will see the brake shoes that are used for the parking brake, emergency brake, and you'll see the little ratchet adjuster on the left-hand side. I think it's time for more brake cleaner, and I use a wire brush to just remove loose rust. You can see dust clouds of rust coming off as I use the wire brush. Put a good quality brake grease on the posts that hold the pads, and I put a little bit on the spring at the back of the caliper. Putting the new pads in can be tricky as the spring at the back of the caliper is very strong. What I do is I put a screwdriver in the back and I push the spring back and slide the pads in. There's a more detailed description of how I do this in my previous video where I do the front brakes on my 997. I buy the pads, rotors and sensors at Pelican Parts. When I did my front brakes, I used Porsche original rotors, so I used the same for the rear. The rotors are labeled left and right, so make sure you get the right one. I use medium Loctite thread locker. Carefully remove the bungee cord and make sure that you don't drop the caliper. I use the top caliper bolt as a retaining bolt, so I just loosely screw it in while I fully install the lower one. Once the bottom bolt is in, remove the top bolt and put some Loctite on it, and then install that one fully as well. Torque the bolts to 63 foot-pounds, which is 85 Newton meters. Push the sensors through the caliper, making sure that the large flat side of the sensor is facing the rotor. I find a screwdriver helps push the sensors into the brake pad, but be careful not to damage the sensor wires. Push the sensor cable into the retaining clips and push the end of the sensor cable into the connector. Definitely time for more brake cleaner. Seriously though, it's a good idea to wipe down the rotor just to make sure there's no grease or dirt on the surface. As the wheel is off, it's a good idea just to have a look around and make sure that everything looks okay. There's no rust, there's no loose parts, the bushings are okay, and there's no oil leaking from anywhere. As the wheel is off, I always check the tire and the rims. Look for any bulges in the sidewall, any damage to the tread surface. Also a good idea to check your tire wear indicators. I also give the wheel a good clean. I use dish soap or washing up liquid. Palmolive is a good one as it removes a lot of the grease without really doing any damage to the wheel itself. I then wash the wheel thoroughly with water and give it a coat of a high quality car wax. Mount the wheel on the car and then put in the wheel nuts by hand. It's really important to do this by hand to get them started, to make sure they don't cross thread. Once they are hand tight, I use a regular ratchet to put them in firmly, and then I use a torque wrench to torque them to 96 foot-pounds, which is 130 Newton meters. Thanks for watching, and let me know in the comments if you do anything different.